The DFS studio is brought to you by DraftKings. Welcome to the Fantasy Footballers DFS and Betting Podcast with your hosts, Kyle Borganoni and Matthew Betz.
Welcome in. Tuesday, November 21st, here on a special edition of the Fantasy Footballers DFS and Betting Podcast. I'm your host, Kyle Borganoni, and I'm joined, as always, by Matthew Fat Turkey Betz.
I'm about to be, dude, on Thursday. Football, family, friends, and, of course, DFS. It's going to be great. There's literally no better day, in my opinion, if you are a fantasy football player and or DFS player, to sit around with your loved ones, pretend like you're engaged, but really in the background, you know, you've got a sweat going on with every game that's happening in the NFL that day. It's the best day of the year, Kyle. I'm super excited. Are you as pumped as I am for this 3-game slate?
You bet. I mean, my aunt, I'm going to explain to her, this is Dontavian Wicks. This is a person that is apparently very important to my life right now. Jake, this is Turd Ferguson right here.
You see that, Grandma? That's Turd Ferguson. We need him to catch a touchdown.
It is funny because you get to zero in on 6 teams and everybody knows all these players inside and out. And also, just as a spoiler alert for anybody out there, everyone will be playing them too. Like, you don't have some crazy edge right now of saying, I know about this player, no one else does. Like, everyone else knows them. It's about your exposures. And we'll talk about roster percentages because a lot of this you can just throw out the window of what we've talked about with DFS because this is its own universe, people. This is a 3-game slate and 3 really good teams on this slate that are heavy favorites. So it's a little different. I also was looking at the slate. I was like, poor AFC. They don't have anybody on this slate. This is just NFC only. I mean, Betz and I are NFC guys, our favorite team. So this is just what we're getting to zero in on. But we'll talk about the Thanksgiving slate. This entire episode will be devoted to that. So we're going to talk Thanksgiving strategy, our salary standouts. We'll preview all 3 games. And then after we give our slate breakers, we will get to battle it out. Betz and I used to do this all the time on the show. We'll bring back an old drop, and Betz and I will go head to head for a very special prize that we will announce later on at the end of the episode. But before we go any further, Betz, I just, I'm throwing a curveball here, but is there a certain player this year, from redraft to best ball to dynasty to DFS, that you feel most thankful for? So you are saying, like, you know what? This person has meant the world to me.
That's a really good question. I obviously haven't thought about it because it wasn't in our plans today. But last year, I felt like the gift that kept on giving was 5th round Amon-Ra St. Brown. Obviously very undervalued. This year, it kind of feels like the waiver wire, man, honestly, for like redraft leagues, as I'm thankful for just in general, because the quarterback injuries have been crazy. The running back injuries have been crazy. I was so lucky and thankful to get Puka Nacua on a team, and with Cooper Kupp now banged up again, maybe that becomes another smash play this week. So that's my answer. It's just the waiver wire in general. You got guys like Kyren Williams off the waiver wire. There's just the list goes on and on. Devin Singletary is turning into a league winner. But I'm going to give Puka Nacua as my official answer.
That's a fun one because he's a player that you root for. And if you look at Puka's like post-game stuff, it's like, that guy plays in the NFL. He just looks like a random dude that just got out of college that doesn't have a job. I know that just doesn't have he just doesn't look like a professional athlete. But so yeah, I have Puka on a couple teams. That's really fun. In Dynasty, I've said this on the Dynasty show that comes out on Wednesday. Tank Dell has meant the world to me as a
good answer.
Late 2nd, early 3rd, but I mean, come on. I mean,
come on. You're talking about his quarterback.
No, I mean, CJ Stroud is definitely it, but I mean, hey, is there anyone else this year that has meant more to me than Keenan Allen? Because I get it that I'm a truther. I get that I'm blinded, but man, Keenan Allen has been so fun to not only watch, get peppered with targets, but get touchdowns. Like, he's at 7 right now. His career high is 8. So that's been really fun. in my main 2 home leagues, I went all in, and all my friends made fun of me. They're like, I know that you're a little too obsessed with Keenan Allen, but it's been awesome. He has carried me. He has put my teams on his back. In full PPR, he feels like a cheat code. I have a team with CeeDee Lamb and Keenan Allen in full PPR. Just carry me all the way to a championship that I've never won in this home league.
That's
Ever.
crazy.
I've never won.
You can basically count on a floor of 15 catches between those two guys every single week.
It's glorious. So if you have a player this year that you feel thankful, make sure to share it with us. I'll also just say, I was thinking about Christian McCaffrey because he's on the slate. We'll talk about him. Like, guys, this is the best running back on the planet. And I think we're almost like, well, he's getting older and we're kind of used to it now. Like, watch Christian McCaffrey play football. It feels effortless that he can get 5-6 yards on certain carries that other players can't, and that his floor is so high. So I'm excited to talk about Christian McCaffrey. He is a huge talking point because you can say, like, hey, what if Christian McCaffrey only gets 15 points? 15 points might be the RB2 on this slate. Last year it was. Ezekiel Elliott was the RB2 on the slate with, 15, 16 points. So in 3 games, the strategy is different. Everything else is different. And we'll talk about all of those. If you want to get all of our picks for the Thanksgiving Day slate, right now I am looking at this extensive first look article that I gave, talked about strategy, looked at everything that the field did last year, their flex exposure, roster percentages, everything else. Betz is putting up the pace of play for Thanksgiving, so you get to walk through all 3 of these games with us. Our Thanksgiving Day picks for both DraftKings and FanDuel. You can get all of that in the DFS Pass, so go to dfspass.com if you want to do that. But before we get into our salary standouts, let's talk general Thanksgiving strategy, because we kind of have to unplug some of the things that we've talked about before. Like, a general thing we always say is, hey, you probably don't want to play 2 running backs in the same game. Well, it's different. You can just, throw some things out. So what are some overarching thoughts you have about Thanksgiving and how to approach this?
Yeah, I think what you just mentioned is probably a good place to start, in that, on a main slate, when you've got 10 to 12 games, you're, like you said, trying to set rules, especially if you build through an optimizer. You're not playing players against your own defense. You're probably limiting your running backs in the same game to 1. You're probably most weeks only single or double stacking, 1 or 2 pass catchers with your quarterback. But on a small slate where the player pool obviously shrinks massively, you don't need to be perfect to win in GPPs. And you hit on that at the top. Like last year, Zeke was optimal, and he didn't have that great of a game. But like on a main slate, if you get 10 or 12 points from running back, that's not good enough in a large field tournament. So on the smaller slates, you just want to be mindful that you don't have to be perfect, and you shouldn't blindly, if you're setting an optimizer, use what you always do, which is double stack, bring back, no players against the defense. You don't want to get into robot mode. You want to open your mind to just different combinations that are possible. On a small slate, I kind of treat it a little bit like Showdown, where things go a little bit wonky sometimes, and you can benefit when that happens. So smaller slate, obviously smaller player pool, lower scores, and more of a game theory, I think, to this, more of a game than actual like hardcore football takes, is how I'll be approaching this 3-game slate.
Yes, I agree. I think I will try to turn off some of my, this is what this team's really good at, and we just know they're going to control the clock this way. Like last year, we'll go through some of those, but like Mac Jones was an optimal play last year, and the field just didn't play him at all. Like he was really,
Guilty.
really low. I know, because you kind of throw out what we think's going to happen in these game scripts. Now, we have 3 games that they're all heavy favorites. I just looked at the lines. Detroit favored by 7.5 over Green Bay. Dallas favored by 11 over Washington. And the 49ers on the road are favored by 6.5 on Seattle. So we have heavy favorites. And it's not hard to look at this slate and say, these are the 3 best teams. I mean, other than the Eagles, these are the other best teams in the NFC, right? So you're going to lean into team implied totals. You're going to lean into teams that are favorites. So my advice, and the way that I'm taking, is if I'm playing in tournaments, I'm going to just pick 2 different stacks and just stay with that. So is it going to be Dak stacks, Purdy stacks, Jared Goff stacks, and then in large field, if you want to throw in a different one, but you can't cover all your bases. You really can't. Like as much as you can think like, I can just create every lineup combination, there are so many different ways. Like the Packers legitimately have 4 wide receivers and Luke Musgrave that could be in the optimal lineup. Washington, we know, has any of those wide receivers. Like, is it McLaurin? Is it Dotson? Curtis Samuel? Diami Brown would catch a bomb every once in a while. Like, there are so many different combinations here. So you can't cover every base. I would just say make sure you pick a couple of stacks and be willing to go overboard. Last year, the field played it a little safe, especially in the flex. I looked at, in the Millie Maker, what the field did at the flex. And basically, we usually say, like, play wide receiver in the flex. That's usually what matters. The field only played it about 50% of the time, yet the optimal was almost at 70% of the time. The field played 3 running backs a ton, and usually that will project really well on a median standpoint. Guys, get weird here. Throw in a wide receiver that you're uncomfortable with in a tournament, and I think it'll go a lot better for you.
Yeah, I think especially on this slate, that's pretty good advice because we have actually a unique situation where, Aaron Jones is going to miss this game. And actually their backup, Manuel Wilson, dislocated his shoulder. So he doesn't even look like he's going to play. The team had to sign James Robinson off the street and re-sign Patrick Taylor from the Patriots practice squad. So like AJ Dillon in a cash game setting looks awesome, as will Zach Charbonnet if Kenneth Walker misses. So it feels so good to plug those 2 guys in and you're getting volume. And then, oh, by the way, if Gibson misses, Brian Robinson is going to project great. So automatically, I fear that 2 or 3 running back construction is just going to be mega chalk this week because in a median standpoint, it projects pretty good. But if 1 or 2 of those guys fail, and like Kyle said, you get a wide receiver in flex. I mean, I usually hate tight end in flex, but a tight end in flex, get a little weird.
Yes.
You're going to have just a different construction than the field. So I'm going to be mindful of those injury reports this week. And if those 3 guys are projecting optimal, which if you play cash, like if that's the situation, I'd probably play them. But in tournaments, that is going to be super heavily rostered. So I'll be looking to get off of that build.
Yes. And Betz and I generally don't play cash on Showdown or on Thanksgiving slate. Like I'll do some 50-50s because it's the best slate of the year, right? Like I want to play. I love playing DFS, but generally speaking, the advice we will give on this show is geared towards tournaments, small fields, but large field stuff. So any last thoughts on that kind of stuff?
Yeah, I just think just to drive that point home a little further, it's just hard to pick the best plays and have an edge on the field when the player pool is so small. When we're making these like really tough decisions, last week of like Tony Pollard versus Aaron Jones, or spending up for CMC or Tyreek, like it's hard to kind of get those things right. And if you feel like you can do that, it's easier to do on a big slate. On a small slate, everyone knows who the best plays are, and so in 50-50s and double ups, you're used to seeing, sometimes guys are 20, 30, 40% rostered. On this slate, like some quarterbacks and running backs are going to be 70 to 80% rostered. So there's just like not really much of an edge there. If you get one thing wrong, you're probably not cashing. So I think if you are going to play some cash this week, which I'll probably play a little, I'm going to mostly just try to play head-to-heads and less of the 50-50s, but I'm definitely leaning into that GPP life on this 3-game slate.
I looked back at last year's data and I posted this chart in our Discord, in our DFS channel, if you want to be a part of that. But last year, Josh Allen smashed as quarterback 1. Josh Allen, we've had the last 2 years. And then Mac Jones 5x'd on his salary. So he was the optimal last year, and he was the least rostered quarterback. The chalk running backs last year were Tony Pollard, Devin Singletary, and Ramondre. Only one of those hit. It was Ramondre. And Saquon was a player that you kind of decide, do I want to pay up for him? And he really wasn't worth it. The wide receivers last year went bananas. Justin Jefferson, Amon-Ra, Stephon Diggs, CeeDee Lamb, all put up 20-plus points. But the only player that got close to 6xing on their salary last year, Betz, was your boy, Nelson Aguilar, who put up 18.5 points at only 3.5 roster percentage. So that's one of those where you're going to find a guy, Richie James, Isaiah McKenzie, all guys under 10% last year, despite being a small field. And then last year, Dawson Knox was the chalk tight end, and he completely busted 3.7 points. But if you paid up for TJ Hawkinson or Dalton Schultz, you had a really, really good game. I had totally forgotten about this player, but we talked about Lawrence Cager as like the Giants backup wide receiver tight end because Daniel Bellinger didn't play. So,
dude, what is with the Giants, man? Year after year, we're just like scraping the bottom of the barrel for just random backups. I mean, I feel bad for Giants fans. It's been so rough.
Dude, Darius Slayton in a GPP last week didn't win me any money, but I did have him in a couple of lineups.
Well, he left early.
I think he scored 18.
Yeah, but if he didn't get injured, dude, he and Tommy were just making magic out there.
Dude, he's a buffed up version of Danny DeVito these days. He's a new man. Also, I'll add this. Last year, defense did not matter at all. Like, it just, the points were 4, 6, 9, 2, 3, 5. Like, nobody really distanced himself from the field. This year, I think, will be really, really tough because we have 3 really good defenses that you have to pay up for that are heavy favorites. So let's talk about these salaries.
Salary standouts.
Betz and I are going to go through each position pretty quickly to give you a lay of the land on DraftKings of where each position is. And then we're going to go game by game. So this is more to say, like, this is what we think the field's going to do. Here's a really good play. At quarterback, Dak is the top salaried quarterback, but he's only 6,800. And I look back the last 3 or 4 years, that is really cheap compared to Josh Allen. In 2020, we had Deshaun Watson, who was 7,400. So this is really cheap. I feel like Dak should be $1,000 more when you factor in how awesome he's been, and it's against Washington, who is 31st in schedule adjusted points to quarterback. So Dak feels like the clear quarterback one play on this slate.
I agree, even at that, most expensive salary, because we only have 6 quarterbacks here to choose from, and one of them is injured, right? So like the field probably isn't going to play Geno. We'll see how they react if it's Drew Lock, but if Geno's active and he's banged up, the field's not going to go there, and then it becomes 5 options, right? And it gets just smaller. So I think Dak is going to be massively, massively rostered for good reason. Like you talked about the matchup and how good he's been. If you are playing cash games this week, he's probably the quarterback I would choose and pay up for. I agree with you. He should be north of 7K. So it does feel like a relative value, especially on this slate where you can poke holes in a bunch of the guys, especially down below.
Yeah, and then it's like Jared Goff at home is always a narrative we talk about at Ford Field. He's averaging over 2 touchdowns per game. So I feel like he has a high floor. Brock Purdy's on fire right now. He's only 6,100. So the 3 favorites seem like they're going to be the 3 ones that the field plays. And then Sam Howell, I think, is the biggest wild card on this slate. I mean, Jordan Love is cheap, but he's also a player that was sacked 5 times when they played earlier in the year, threw 2 interceptions against the Lions, and that was at home. So Jordan Love on the road doesn't feel like a great play, but Howell, we'll talk about that game. I think he's the most interesting for tournaments if you wanted to get different, knowing that you get passing volume, and he's a threat to pick 6 or fumble 6 something and then get the ball right back and throw the ball 40 plus times a game. So do you have a certain lean between Goff and Purdy?
I think, like I said, for cash, for me, it's Dak. I think Purdy, just, save $200 if you need it to drop down to that range. I love the Purdy stacks just because they're so efficient, and we're going to talk about the game environment and kind of how we see that game going. But Purdy doesn't have to do that much to get there because his skill guys are so good and can do so much with the ball. The correlation actually with him and Christian McCaffrey is insane, but McCaffrey is second on the team in target share, when all 4 of those guys play. So like, it's very clear, like to me, you play him with CMC and then you play him with one of your favorite pass catchers, which gives you a lot of flexibility. So I love betting on them to hit their team total this week in a decent matchup here against the Seahawks. So for me, I would choose Purdy over Goff if I had to choose, but I'm going to have exposure, I think, to both those guys.
At running back, Christian McCaffrey is only 8,700. So they lowered his price, which you'd think from the game, like if I was creating a game and I was in charge of stuff, which DraftKings never asked me, I would price this dude up so that if you were going to play Christian McCaffrey, he needs to be 9,600. That the field has to say, if I'm going to play him, it's going to cost me 8,700. To me, is way too cheap. I've got a stat for you. Since becoming a 49er, okay, so that's last year when he got traded. If you throw out that first game where they kind of eased him in, since then, he's averaging 21.7 opportunities, 120 total yards, and 1.4 touchdowns per game. So I think we all are factoring in a touchdown. I think we're factoring over 100 yards total and about 4 receptions. On this slate, like that's already giving you the kind of numbers that you need in cash for sure. But then in tournaments, like the raw point totals, he's going to be up there.
It's hard to poke holes, man. I think what DK did, it's a fun slate. They want people to play. They probably priced these guys a little bit down just to make it more fun that you could get your guys.
Oh, they did. Definitely did.
Because just a couple days ago, he was 9,200 or 9,300.
93, the same as
on
Tyreek.
the main slate, right? So and he had a great game. So why would they price him down? So that's why they're doing it, to make it more fun. But man, yeah, again, if you're playing cash, there's enough punt options that are okay that you can fit CMC. So I do expect him to be heavily rostered, but it's good chalk. You can't really poke any holes, right?
Yeah, Jahmyr Gibbs is $200 cheaper than what he was this past week at $6,800. Dave Montgomery at $6,300. So one of the Lions running backs I feel like are an optimal play. And this past week, it was both of them getting there. Montgomery on FanDuel is an even more interesting choice for me. He's averaging 4.7 carries inside the red zone and 1.6 carries inside the 5. So on a touchdown dependent site, he's 7,800. So he's actually cheaper than Gibbs by about 400. So I prefer him on FanDuel. But both of these running backs look like really solid plays as heavy favorite against a run funnel defense. It's just the narrative kind of speaks for itself.
Yeah, I'm going to talk about that when we get to the matchups, but Green Bay has actually been playing much better in rush defense recently. It doesn't matter. The Lions, they ran all over the Bears, and we talked about for 6 weeks straight how good the Bears rush defense was too. So their scheme is so good. Their offensive line is healthy. I think they're actually the healthiest team on the slate are the Lions. So they look like a great bet to just have success at home, as they always do. So yeah, what I love about that situation is I think in tournaments, both guys are in play because we don't know who it's going to be, right? And you could tell yourself a story where it's Gibbs, or you could tell yourself a story where Montgomery gets the goal line touches and falls in the end zone once or twice. So I love that spot for tournaments, just attack an ambiguous situation. So I don't know where I would go as far as my favorite play, but I'll have exposure, I think, to both guys this week.
Yeah, Montgomery had a couple more targets this week, so he's not a complete zero in the passing game. We know he can catch the ball. Yeah, you gave out the term they're the healthiest team of the week. I feel like that should be a new segment or a little stinger that we have in here that Betz, as the injury expert, gets to put his stamp of approval. Andy's almost upset of the week.
Yes,
but you get to say this is the healthiest. It does help my analysis when you say stuff like this was the first week that DK Metcalf was off the injury report. That's
scored a touchdown.
I know. Explain to people though. I know I'm going aside here, but that changed how I look at, and I play DK a little bit more because I was like, okay, this isn't the DK we've gotten for a while. So I don't know, just that stuff matters, right?
Yeah, for sure. I think that's where some of the art comes into this, is you can't just be a robot to what the numbers tell you. We talked about this a little bit on the Dynasty show too, where the value in watching film comes from. And we talked about that more the prospect lens or rookie lens. But in this aspect, clearly wasn't truly 100% healthy, battled the rib and hip issues for literally the entire season since week 2. But like you mentioned, I noticed the trend. I was like, okay, Tyler Lockett's practice participation last week was not the same as what it had been in previous weeks. He'd kind of been DNP limited full, and then he would play, or DNP full and play, or whatever the case would be. But this past week, Lockett was a DNP 3 weeks in a row, and he actually came out and only played 55% of the snaps and ran 71% of the routes. That was down from his season-long average of 80% snaps and 88% route rate. So Lockett clearly is not healthy. Meanwhile, Metcalf was off the injury report, so I played him a decent amount last week in GPPs, and I'll probably be doing the same this week, given that I do expect Lockett to play, but I just don't think he's healthy right now.
The other running backs that we need to mention, Tony Pollard at 6,700. Kenneth Walker seems not likely to play. We have to wait on that information. We're recording this on Tuesday. Aaron Jones seems like he's not going to play. He's at 6K. So then you have 3 running backs that are back-to-back-to-back in pricing. Brian Robinson Jr. 5,900, A.J. Dillon at 5,400, and Zach Charbonnet at 5,300. I can tell you right now, the field will want to play Charbonnet as an exciting rookie that you've been waiting to have the opportunity, and he got a ton of snaps this past week. So it's one of those things 85% of the snaps, 6 targets this past week. Didn't do much with them, 6 for 22, but Charbonnet feels like a plug-and-play player that you can look at projections. If you went into an optimizer and the optimizer is going to love him because at 5,300, you're going to get 15 opportunities, even against San Francisco. So I can poke holes in all three of those guys. AJ Dillon, he's in that same club as Rachaad White. He's a butt runner. He just falls into the lineman's buttocks over and over and over again. He's not very good. And then Brian Robinson apparently is now Alvin Kamara. He catches 6 balls a game. So he's going to project really well. So do you have a lean on those three?
Yeah, I think if you're talking about just like cash game median projection, it's really hard to get away from AJ Dillon at 5,400. However, I will probably be fading him in tournaments and just hope he doesn't fall in the end zone. Because like you said, he's just not that good. He's not a great running back in the NFL. But when Aaron Jones has been out, he has handled over 70% of the running back touches in those 3 games. And so it's going to project great. I think if you're making me pick one, like I said, for cash games, he'd be the guy I'd pick if I had to choose one. I'm also interested in fading Brian Robinson in this spot. We have a pretty large sample of Robinson not being viewed as this great pass catcher, and now we have 2 weeks of it. However, last week, context is important. Curtis Samuel was ejected for, I think, throwing a punch or something in the first half, and then you saw the passing game work take a big spike up. So if Curtis Samuel doesn't get ejected this week, does that happen again for a 3rd week in a row? And whenever the field is so certain that something is going to happen, I'll bet against it in tournaments and just hope you're on the right side of it. So that's my kind of long-winded way of saying I'm lower on these 3 guys in general for tournaments. Like I said, AJ Dillon's probably the best quote-unquote cash play.
Brian Robinson's a wild story because I pretty much faded him in best ball because I don't think he's very good. He's the RB4 on the season. He was a dart throw 2 weeks ago that killed it for us. He was a cash game play last week, and now we get him on Thanksgiving. Like, he is way more involved in my life than I thought he would be.
He's in your head, dude.
B-Rob, man. But 5,900, I think it's a fine tag. Like, I don't mind it at all. If you want to go in dart throw territory, do we know anything about Antonio Gibson and his status?
Well, he missed last week, of course, which is why Brian Robinson became mega chalk in DFS. And he was limited on Monday's estimated report. However, he was a DMP all 3 days last week, and then they said they were going to test him out pregame, and they never even did that. So, like, he wasn't close apparently last week, so I'm surprised they listed him as limited Monday. Even if he goes, you're not going to see the same player or the workload, I don't think, that Gibson was getting in the passing game. So he's the key to me on Brian Robinson, obviously. If he's out, that would be a big boost for Brian Robinson.
Yep. And then one more is just sneaky name. Rico Dowdle is 4,600. He's super cheap on FanDuel, 5,100. He saw 29% of the snaps last week, 10 opportunities, including 2 targets. I just need to mention him on a small slate as a player that's cheap. You could see him fall in the end zone. And at the end of the day, it's like, okay, well, this guy 3X's on his salary, and he ends up in the optimal lineup if other running backs fail. So just another name I wanted to throw out there. Let's take a break, and we'll come back to wide receivers. At wide receiver on this Thanksgiving slate, we have 2 elites. We have CeeDee Lamb at 8,700, Amon-Ra 8,500. Our boys, so we're just going to sing their praises. They're awesome. And then Brandon Ayuk is technically cheaper than what he was last week, despite going for 156. That's shocking to me. He's only 7K, so he's going to project really, really well. Of those 3, do you have a lean if you're price sensitive? Like, who's gonna X most on their salary of those 3? I'm putting you under the gun.
The elite wide receivers?
Yes.
Oh, man. I think you got to pick CeeDee, right? I mean, just this Washington defense.
Yes.
This secondary.
That's who I would pick too.
So horrific. And I mean, I love Amon-Ra. I'll never say anything bad about him. But with Ayuk, you know that there's games where Kittle's going to take over, where Debo might take over. So, like, if you're picking one that's just like best projection and probably the highest ceiling, even though the salary is reflecting that, it's definitely CeeDee Lamb in the spot.
Maybe he's in your lineup later when we battle it out. Maybe not.
I'll never
but
tell
I feel like you have to have one of these 3. Like, if you're playing a tournament, it's really hard envisioning a scenario where one of these 3 guys just isn't there. Like, just all 3 of them get under, 12 points or something. You'd be super disappointed. But CeeDee Lamb against Washington feels like a great matchup. Amon-Ra in cash is going to be maybe, is he the safest most consistent player in the NFL right now, other than CMC?
I was going to say CMC, and then CeeDee Lamb is right up there, dude. Like, his role in the offense is truly insane when you think about the volume, the air yards, and the end zone targets. It's just, there's no role like it currently in the NFL as far as what he brings to the table. So I think it's probably CeeDee Lamb for me if I'm choosing one of these guys for cash, even with the $200. But obviously, if you can't make it work and you need $200, St. Brown's totally fine.
Moving down a little further, we have DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett. Deebo Samuel at a too cheap for this slate price tag at $5,900. He's interesting. The Washington guys, I have such a hard time clicking the button on Terry McLaurin in any format. It's just, I never feel like I get the ceiling outcome I want. And then the Packer wide receivers are all bunched together. Romeo Doubs at $5K, Christian Watson's $4,300, Jaden Reed, who's one of our boys, at $4,200. And then I love the price tag on JSN at $4,100. I think that's a really solid one that you can add in as a third piece. So any thoughts on this middle tier of wide receivers?
Yeah, I think it's super interesting because this is where I think you're going to win tournaments, is getting this right. Because like you said, you can poke holes in McLaurin. We know Dobbs is kind of shaky here and there. Dotson literally has 30 points or 2 points. So like the wide range of outcomes there. And then the Packers guys, I'm super interested in for tournaments for two reasons. One, AJ Dillon is going to be mega chalk. And then it's ambiguous, right? You don't really know who it's going to be. So you have an opportunity to kind of leverage the field. I think Reed will be somewhat popular for this slate, context-wise. So Watson's kind of interesting for tournaments. We know the ceiling's there. We know the deep targets are there. Just will it hit or not is the question. And in GPPs, that's obviously what we're chasing. So I think the Packers guys, to me, are super interesting for tournaments. I'll certainly be having a lot of exposure to those guys as leverage off of AJ Dillon.
Yeah, I think where this slate is going to be one is there because you think a lot of builds are going to have CMC, one of the two elites, like Lamb or Amon-Ra, and then they're probably going to throw in a Packer wide receiver. Brandon Cooks has a good price tag too at $4,500 for this slate. And then a cheap guy. The really cheap guys are thin for a reason. Michael Gallup, I don't know what their plan is because they paid him a ton and his routes are like 16 routes a game and he's just not being targeted. So he's kind of weird. Josh Reynolds and Jameson Williams, I think, are interesting for this game, for this for this format. They're interesting. Dontavian Wicks got targeted 5 times on 15 routes this past week, so he'll jump out to some people. Khalif Raymond is in our life every single year at this time of the year because he's on the Lions. Sure, why not? And then if you really wanted to, Martavius Bryant is technically in your player pool.
Oh, is 3K. He really?
Yeah.
I didn't even see that. That's pretty awesome.
Yeah.
Don't play.
All right, tight end. Yeah, tight end. George Kittle is 6K. Sam Laporta is 5.2, and then it's a lot of lower options. I think if you punt, this is one of my takes so far. If you try to punt and say, you know what, I'll just get Luke Musgrave or Logan Thomas and get out of there, there are drastic consequences because Kittle and Laporta have real ceilings, and then Ferguson is attached to Dak, who can go off anytime. So punting with these teams that are not favorited can just give you lines that are like 3 for 28, and you're just screwed. But I think Turd Ferguson will be played by the field because he's cheap, and you're not paying up for the next ones. And then Musgrave had 6 targets last week. He's only 3,300. Noah Fant doesn't exist to me.
Yeah, I'm with you. Yeah, this is an interesting spot because what I think I'll be doing is letting roster percentages dictate how I handle this, because as we saw last year, it was like, oh man, Dawson Knox, like clearly the best play on the slate. But literally any tight end, not named Kelsey, Kittle, Andrews, the elite guys, is going to give you a couple of games of 2 for 12. That's just what they do, right? So like if the field knows it's Logan Thomas this week, I'm not going to play Logan Thomas. So I'm just going to let roster percentage dictate that and hope I'm on the right side of it, so to speak.
Last thoughts on defense. The 3 favorites are the 3 favorites for a reason, and they're priced up that way. Dallas at 3,800, the 49ers at 3,600, the Lions at 3,200. Those 3 are legit defenses by themselves, and then on this slate, they make sense. I think those 3 defenses will be 75-80% of roster percentages, and rightfully so. Like it's shocking to me that Dallas, 2 weeks ago, we were playing them in cash at 4,400. Then they went down to 4,100, And then now this week on a smaller slate, they're only 3,800. So I don't know. I think play one of the favorites. That's my advice.
Same. They're going to be wildly popular, I think. Dallas will be against Washington for good reason. So I think maybe getting off them and hoping what happened 2 weeks ago happens again, where they're okay but not incredible for DFS, and they give you 8 points, and one of your other defenses has a pick six or a strip sack or something that they return for a touchdown. You just need variance to go your way. So again, like tight end, I'm going to be looking to get off the chalk if I can, especially in tournaments.
I tried to stare at the other defenses, Green Bay, Seattle, Washington. I'm like, is there any route where these defenses are legit? And I think Seattle, like if you wanted to punt with Seattle and you're hoping that they get 6 or 7 points and the rest of the field stays relatively measured, like 8 or fewer, you would be super happy with that because at least they're at home. But I cannot see myself playing the Commanders at all. Like I don't think it makes any sense on a slate where I said earlier, like all the expensive players are not expensive enough. So I don't think it really matters to save $500 or $600. Just play one of the favorites. That's
like
advice.
You said last year. Last year is the perfect example. We can just point people to that too. This is not a football take. Like clearly the Cowboys are the best play on the slate, and then I would say probably the Niners. But like you said, if the Cowboys give you 8, the Niners give you 7, and the Seahawks or the Commanders give you 6, it's like great. Hopefully the savings that you had lets you spend up elsewhere and get the plays that you needed if defense doesn't matter. And if you're fading Dallas or you're fading the Niners, that's what you're saying is you're hoping defense just doesn't matter on the slate. As last year, it didn't matter. And so if you save the money, hopefully it works. So with that said, we know just because I said that, Dallas is going to have 2 pick sixes and just break the slate. So what could go wrong?
Yep. All right, let's preview these games.
Stack Attack.
We talked strategy. We talked salary standouts. Let's get into the nitty gritty of how we're stacking these games and how we could see it go, which on this sample size, dude, maybe it doesn't even matter. Like sometimes I just we do this as a job. You preview a game and you're trying to explain how game flow could work, but there's so many different scenarios of in one game, this is what could happen. But the first game, Green Bay Packers at Detroit Lions. The Lions are 7.5 point home favorites at Ford Field, and the over-under is at 46. Detroit, number 2 in the league in plays run inside the 10-yard line. We love the elite role for David Montgomery, Jahmyr Gibbs. We wish they were just one running back, but on this slate, they're good enough. Like their raw point totals, if it's 17, 18 points, is going to be good enough. How are you attacking this game?
Yeah, I think that's a great spot to start is the running backs for Detroit, which, as I mentioned, I think the field is going to kind of get a little bit of just, confusion of like, well, I don't know who it is, so maybe I just won't play these guys. So I'll be taking shots on both these guys. I lean Gibbs if I'm just forced to choose one, because when we saw this matchup earlier in the year, Montgomery, of course, came out for, 30 carries, 150 yards, whatever it was, and like 2 or 3 touchdowns. He had that insane game. Since Gibbs has returned with Montgomery, or I should say Montgomery returned with Gibbs in the lineup, 19 and 14 opportunities for Gibbs compared to 12 and 14 for Montgomery. So you're seeing a little bit more workload from Jahmyr Gibbs. We obviously know he'll get the receiving work, which on DraftKings goes a long way. And as I mentioned, this rushing matchup is not as easy as it was early in the year. Since week 6, Green Bay ranks 28th in pass defense EPA. They're 7th against the run. So the Lions' run game is so good that it doesn't really matter the opponent. But just if you're thinking about optimally, like I think it's interesting to stack Gibbs with Goff and Amon-Ra or one of the other wide receivers and just get a little unique with your construction. So I like Gibbs quite a bit in this spot, but obviously Montgomery's totally fine too.
And there's no way you would play both of them together.
I don't think there's no way, because what if on this slate this game hits the over, the Lions put up 35 real life points, and both guys fall in the end zone at least once? I mean, that's certainly possible,
or
right?
Even
so
3 total times between them.
Right. And that could be optimal. So it's unlikely, but that's what Kyle's saying is like on these small slates, weird stuff happens.
Yeah. If you're not fully stacking this game, I think when you're looking at the Lions and you're looking at the Lions at home, you're saying that they're going to hit their team implied total against the Green Bay defense that's just not imposing at all. So, yeah, I think I want a Lions piece that I can build around, even if I'm not fully stacking this game. If it's Gibbs, Montgomery, or Amon-Ra. I think Amon-Ra will carry the most roster percentage because the running backs will just split. The pieces that I think are most interest are Laporta, because he's expensive enough where people are like, well, he's not the most dependable Lions. He's not going to project, his median outcome as better as the running backs in Amon-Ra. I think he carries a ceiling that if Kittle airballs, which we know Kittle can have those games where he's just not the focal point, Laporta carries the next highest ceiling, and then it's Ferguson. So at 5,200, he's fine. He's not getting targeted as much recently, which is kind of frustrating. But on these type of slates, like I just throw that out like, hey, what did he do last week? Don't care. I think of a player that can go 5 for 50 in a score, and he's clearly the tight end one on the slate. So Laporta is just someone I want to highlight that can differentiate your team. And then last week, the Chargers heavily targeted the tight end. Like Donald Parham had 6 targets. It's the most of his career. Your boy Stone Smart had a 50-yard touchdown out of nowhere. So just something to build off of that. Sam Laporta, I think, is a good tournament leverage play.
Yeah, he's really interesting on this slate. One thing that I was just thinking about when you were talking was just when you've had the running backs healthy, we've seen less red zone work as far as targets and him involved as a focal point as the go-to guy in the red zone. So my thought process is, okay, maybe if you are playing Laporta, you're leveraging him off the running backs, and you're hoping that the running backs, i.e., especially Montgomery, doesn't fall in the end zone. That's kind of how I'm thinking about it. That might be a little bit too specific on a small slate, but I think if you're betting on him to score a touchdown, he's probably not scoring from 60 out, right? He's probably scoring from 20 or 15 out, which will take away touchdowns from Montgomery. So I think personally, I'll be playing Laporta as leverage off the running backs. Do you think that's too specific on a small slate?
I mean, you know me. You could say anything. It could probably work. The running backs just as a whole.
You can convince me of literally anything.
on a DFS slate, there's very few things that I wouldn't say. But the Detroit running back, if they were one running back, and we look at their projections, I think I would just say a touchdown's going to go to one of these two guys.
Probably.
And that's taking it away from Laporta. I'm asking okay, so Gibbs at 6,800. Can he hit 16 points? Because that's what I think you're going to need. Same thing with Montgomery. That's what they need. If they get lower than that, and you have an outcome where that, they get 12 points, then I think Laporta makes more sense as leverage. But if, Gibbs hits 18, then you're going to end up with your salary combined just a little different. So we love the Detroit side. We love their favorites right now. If you want a Goff double stack, that's fine. You can even include Gibbs, Goff, Gibbs, Amon-Ra, but I think Amon-Ra is going to be, second or third most popular wide receiver on the slate. So just keep that in mind. His raw points, you can't get away from. And I also feel like because we used up all of our good juju on Jameson last week, he's going to airball this week.
I mean, probably, but we were on it last week, and the trend is good, right? 52% of the snaps 2 weeks ago, 65% last week. And in the same time, he has been running more routes. Just 2 fewer than Josh Reynolds. So you're slowly seeing Reynolds' route share come down, and you're seeing Jameson Williams' route share come up. So I think he's totally in play on this slate, especially if you're stacking Goff. At 3,400, you just need 2 catches, and you hope one of them is a touchdown. And if that happens, as it did last week, he's probably in the optimal this week. So I will be playing some Jameson Williams this week, especially as part of my Goff exposure.
Reynolds is still getting snaps, so it's not like he's just irrelevant. And if he gets in the end zone, that's fine. I feel like these are the kind of slates, though, that's what the heck? Khalif Raymond,
right?
Josh Reynolds, Tom Kennedy, who probably not going to dress, but those kind of players for the Lions end up getting in the end zone. On the Packers side, Jordan Love had a 300-yard game last week. Congratulations, buddy. I cannot for the life of me consider him. I mean, he could get there in garbage time, but because there are other quarterbacks who are more favorites, I think Jordan Love might be the player that I just exit out of my player pool right away.
So he's last year's Mac Jones?
Pretty much like that, but he is way more volatile. I think we would say that his range of outcomes are he scores 1 on the ground, he throws for 2, 40, 50 yards on the ground. He's volatile. He also could have 5 interceptions or something.
I'm going to be playing Jordan Love this week. I'll tell you that.
Just because
right
I said that?
No. The Lions are not good defensively. Like, everyone views this team as good. And we talked about this last week. It's why I was on Justin Fields. They are allowing 8 yards per attempt since week 6. They have gotten destroyed against opposing passers. 26th in EPA per dropback in that sample is Detroit. So, yeah, I want to play some Packers. And for me, if you're thinking about game theory, everyone's playing Dak. Everyone's playing Brock Purdy. Man. Everyone's playing Jared Goff. And so, is Jordan Love the best play? Of course not. On a 6-game slate, is he in play? Yes. And you're telling me I can get a Love stack with, you just pick 2 of the guys because you know it's an ambiguous situation. You're getting such low roster percentage in the early game where you can late swap later as leverage off AJ Dillon. Makes all the sense in the world. So I will be playing some Jordan Love this week. He can also give you some rushing, right? 20 yards is in play, 25 yards is in play. The dude is averaging over 18 DraftKings points per game. If he gives you 16, 17, and Dak for some reason only gives you 20, like, that's in play on this slate. So I'm very open to Jordan Love this week.
I played him last week in tournaments, and I feel like, once again, I've used up the good stuff. Against the Lions earlier this year, 5 sacks, 2 interceptions, a fumble, and yet he still got to like over 17 DraftKings points. I just don't see a crazy high ceiling for him. So last week, he threw for 300 yards and he barely got to 20 fantasy points.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
So
I mean, like I said, he's not.
You're saying
optimal.
This is a tournament? Yes.
Oh yeah. This is a tournament. Just GPP 101. Oh, the running back is going to be the most popular play on the slate. I'll play the passing game and just hope it goes through them.
Yes, I'm totally fine with that from a game theory. With the wide receivers, Romeo Doubs is a touchdown or bust. Like 42% of his fantasy points this year have come from touchdowns. He's tied with he's the Cortland Sutton of the NFC. So he feels like a player.
With this.
I know, and he's getting the end zone targets. So it's like, you like that. Jaden Reed feels like a very safe cash play. And Christian Watson, I can't figure him out. And I don't think anyone can. So he's a really fun tournament dart throw as well. I just don't know how to order these guys. Any of them could catch the touchdown.
Yeah, this is, you throw your hands up and you just hope you have the right ones if you're playing this game as part of the stack. I think all 3 are in play for tournaments, obviously with Love or without if you're not playing Love. The reason I like them is because, like I said, on a slate where we really want to maximize late swap, as much as you can, if you hit on one of these contrarian guys early, you can get onto the chalk later. You can play a CMC, you can play CeeDee Lamb, those kind of things. So I'll be taking shots on these 3. My favorite one for tournaments, I think, is Christian Watson, just because he leads the team.
Who are you?
I know. He leads the team in end zone targets since he returned from the injury. And the 15-yard ADA is the best on his team. So I'll just be hoping one of them hits and praying.
You are just a wild man on this slate, just saying, you know what, Jordan Love, Christian Watson. But you're saying this in the sense of like what the field's going to do. So I totally get that. I think the way that I'm looking at this game, if I'm going to use it, Goff double stack, 1 Packer. But
that's probably the optimal way to play it, yeah.
Yes, but if you want to go overweight, you gain a ton of leverage if you go in on this game. Do you think this game will come in behind the other 2 games in terms of like popularity?
I mean, everyone's going to be playing Dallas, I think, and Niners. So I do think it will be, of the 3, the least popular.
Yes, I agree. All right, so give me your Vegas take.
I actually think the Packers are going to cover the 7.5.
I cannot read. Okay, so 7.5 is a lot. It's not been bet down. Are you sure? You sure we're not working with?
That's what's in our doc.
Okay, well, yeah, that's the line. Okay, I think the 7.5 number, I think I would take. I think I like the over. I like the Lions. The Lions in this game. Like, I'm going to be leaning into Lions early on in the window, but 7.5, I think I would take the Packers. Next game, Washington Commanders at the Dallas Cowboys. The Cowboys have an insane 29-point team implied total. They're favorites again by double digits, by 11, and the over-under is at 47.5. This game's awesome because Washington stinks at defense. So you also get a quarterback in Sam Howell who throws the ball 40-plus times a game. So you have everything you want, and there's a reason this is going to be so popular. The Dallas offense, Dak, CeeDee, very condensed. You can throw in a Turd Ferguson. You can throw in Brandon Cooks. We like that offense. And then you look at the Washington side, like, okay, they're going to be throwing a ton. You can't really run the ball effectively against Dallas. Pick a Washington. That's the way that I think everyone will approach this. If you wanted to go overweight on this game, how do you think you can get different? Because like you said, the field loves it.
Yeah, I think, like you said, a lot of people are going to play Dak. And if you're playing Dak, I just play him with CD. I'd make that rule. And then I think what's interesting on this slate is you could just onslaught it. Like you could play Dak, CD, Cooks, and Gallup, and Jake Ferguson, and just hope Dak is the QB1 on the slate, and Dallas puts up 40 points, and the other games are and are okay, but they don't get there. And I think that's what I was talking about a little bit too with these smaller slates in the playoffs. Is everyone feels like they need exposure to every game just to get a little piece of it. But if the other two games hit the under, there's an injury, something weird happens, and Dak just explodes. What if he brings 3 pass catchers with him instead of 2? I mean, that's certainly possible. So I think that's one way to do it, is just to really lean in super heavily to Dallas and just hope they give you 40 points.
Yeah, I'm going to hammer that point home because in my, playing this slate over the years, I remember the early days, I felt like I had to cover all my bases. Right. Okay, like I'm building my lineups. Okay, I got a Dak stack and I'm bringing it back with McLaurin. And then, I like McCaffrey and I'll correlate him with JSN. Oh, but I don't have anybody from the Packers and Lions, so let me just get Jaden Reed and Amon-Ra and, and like,
for sure,
you end up getting into a ton of roster percentage and everybody has that type of construction. So what you're really trying to do when you think of these games is more of individually, does this game go off? If this game goes off and what is needed, and then what am I saying in these other games isn't going to be as optimal? Let's say that game hits 38 combined points. I don't even need that game. Like I might not even need Christian McCaffrey because he gets 20 points, but this game goes for 60 plus and it's the bananas game. So that's the important point. I need your read on Tony Pollard because we've basically been up and down, up and down, up and down. You played him this past week, right, in cash?
I did.
I did not. So we reversed course, by the way.
Yeah, well, you were the one that was you were a huge Tony Pollard supporter early in the week, and then by Sunday you were like, nah, I can't do it.
I just needed to give you the courage that you needed.
It worked. Hey, against Carolina, everyone gets there.
Yeah. So what's your read on him this week?
Yeah, I think he's super interesting. Dallas, just on the year, is not targeting running backs the same way that they have been historically. However, he did see 5 targets last week. So I guess you can include him as part of this game if you want to. For me, I'm going to be lower on him than whatever roster percentage says. Washington is good, man, against the run. And teams are choosing to throw on them. Dallas has shown us that they are a pass-first team over the last month. They are top 3 in pass rate over expectation in that 4-game sample. So I just want to lean into that. And Washington is not going to be able to stop Dak, I don't think. So if Dak gets there, it's probably taking away from Tony Pollard. So I'm lower on Pollard in the tough matchup. Washington, since week 6, is 3rd in EPA per rush attempt defensively, and they're 2nd in success rate allowed. So this does not profile as an elite Tony Pollard spot.
So I'm looking at the Washington side. I'm asking myself, like, what can this team do for them to be an optimal play in a 3-game slate? You get volume from Howell. You get 300 yards, throws 40 times, probably throws at least 1 or 2 picks, might get sacked 5 times. Like it's possible to play Sam Howell and the Dallas defense on this slate. Like it's weird enough where like they could get 15 and Howell could just throw nonstop and end up getting there.
Dude, that was Jameis for years, right? He'd throw a pick 6, right, get the ball back. Sweet, let's keep getting more points. So I think that's actually really interesting on this slate.
Yeah, he can run one in, but I would say if I did that, I would want a Howell double stack. And then, yeah, you can eat into some chalk with CeeDee Lamb in this game. So if you played CeeDee Lamb, Dallas defense, and you double stacked Sam Howell, I think you'd get different with the Washington players, knowing that Dallas and CeeDee Lamb are going to be chalk, but you're playing a stack that no one really wants to play. So if I was doing that, it's probably just McLaurin, and I guess Logan Thomas is cheap enough and running enough routes and old enough that I guess he could work. But it's hard to look at the other wide receivers and have confidence because Jahan Dotson doesn't exist some weeks.
Yeah, I put this on here. Since week 6, here's the target shares for all 4 of their main pass catchers. McLaurin, 22%. Dotson's 14.1. Logan Thomas at 12.6. And Curtis Samuel at 12.4. So you're just not getting, week to week consistency as far as elite target share. It's Brian Robinson, dude. As far as an elite target share. So again, kind of like the Packers, you throw your hands up. This is a great spot to take some shots in tournaments and hope you land on the right one. Because we know they're going to throw, and they're going to throw a ton. So I think one of these guys is super interesting, and I'd be surprised if at least one of these guys isn't close to optimal, if not in the optimal lineup, just because Howell is going to be chucking the entire game.
Yeah. So in the same way that you gave the case for Jordan Love, because AJ Dillon's going to be super popular, I just think Sam Howell is a great leverage point if Dak's going to be the most popular. Like, I'm not saying Howell's going to be great. He could totally dud this game, but his range of outcomes and the leverage you get in the same game makes a lot of sense from a game theory standpoint. But give me your Vegas take.
I'm going to lay it with Dallas, dude. They're doing it every week. So Dallas -11.
I'm going to lay it like a sucker too, just because I think CeeDee Lamb could go for 80 points because he's freaking awesome.
I hope he does.
Last game, San Francisco 49ers at the Seattle Seahawks. The 49ers are 7-point road favorites. If Geno was healthy, would you put this more at like 5?
Probably.
5.5?
Yeah, probably somewhere in there.
Yeah. I mean, it's tough for any road team, but the over-under is 42.5. We like Seattle because they throw. We hate Seattle because they're just not efficient in the red zone. They're super frustrating. So if it's Drew Lock, it's even more frustrating because I think I've said on this podcast before, like, he should not be in the league. He should be out making mixtapes or whatever else he wants to do with his life. Drew Lock, if Drew Lock was like born in a different generation, he would be labeled as like the most troubled child ever, but he's in a TikTok generation. So he kind of gets away with some of his immaturity. What a turd. So how are you building this game?
Oh man. CMC is awesome, obviously. I think one thing that's super interesting about this is playing the Purdy stack, like I said, with CMC. And you just hope that the Niners come out and put up 30 points as they usually do when their guys are healthy. So I actually really like this spot for the Purdy stacks. And if you look at the correlation, which I got this from Fantasy Labs, they have a tool for this. Brandon Ayuk has the highest correlation on the team with Christian McCaffrey. And this is the stack I played last week when I took down a small field tournament, was Purdy, CMC, Ayuk. Ayuk, I want to hammer it home. Like, his role is among the best in football, not just on the team. Like, you look at his air yard share, he has almost half of the entire air yard share of the team. 25.6% of the targets when all three of Debo, Ayuk, and Kittle have been healthy this year. So he, to me, is super interesting. Brandon Ayuk is, because when you think about the top two studs in the slate, which you can't really poke holes, but like, everyone's going to play CD and Amon-Ra. And I think Ayuk will be played some, but he's very tough to fit if you do play one of those two guys. So I think playing Ayuk on the slate for tournaments is really interesting. You hope he has an awesome game. And if you do that, then you're saying, Lamb gives you 18 points and he's not incredible, or Amon-Ra gives you, 15 and he's good but not great, and Ayuk smashes. So that's my lean here on this game, is I'm going to play into that double stack.
I think this is the hardest game to get right, because with the San Francisco side, we've seen games where it's an Ayuk game. We've seen games where it's a Debo game. We've seen games where it's a Kittle game. It's like really hard. And so you're leaning into correlation, which is what you did last week. I totally agree with that. I just know that, like, we usually don't play Ayuk and Debo together. We usually never play Kittle and Debo together. And so on this slate, if the field knows that, you're looking at combinations that are just very, very concrete. Like, okay, well, we don't play these two together, but anything could happen in a one-game sample size. I want 2 49ers on my roster. Like, just from looking at this, it's really hard if you're stacking the other games. If you're stacking Dallas, you're stacking Detroit, to get 2 of those in here, because, other than Debo being 4,900, Kittle's, Debo's 5,900, Kittle's 6,000, Ayuk's 7,000, and then McCaffrey's the most expensive. So all of those guys, you can't fit them all in from just a median standpoint. I wonder, and maybe this is Galaxy Brain here, in what scenario is Christian McCaffrey not in the optimal lineup? Because I think the field's going to play him 70% of the time in tournaments.
Yeah, I mean, the way he doesn't get there is if he gives you 18, 19 points and you don't play him, but you play both of Lamb and Amon-Ra, and those guys go for 22 and 25 points, right? And like those are the two studs you need, and not CMC when you adjust for price and cost. That's how he doesn't get there, which it's possible, right? I mean, we saw that a couple weeks ago when he was decently popular. I think it was against the Jaguars. He had, which is crazy for how good he is in fantasy. Like his floor was like 20 DraftKings points. But at his price, which at that time was like 9K or whatever, that's not really winning you a tournament, right? And that's what you're saying is if you fade him, you just hope that's the outcome and he doesn't go for 2 touchdowns and catch 5 balls.
Yeah, you would need the Detroit running backs, one of those guys to be optimal. Potentially Tony Pollard is there. Maybe AJ Dillon does get there. He falls in the end zone one time, or Charbonnet. Those are the kind of combinations when you start adding them up. If you want to do that in a spreadsheet, you literally can just say, okay, say Charbonnet gets 15. Let's say, Gibbs gets 20 and McCaffrey gets 20. Like you can find combinations where it doesn't work. So in this game, I really like Kittle because he's been awesome with Purdy, and that's been a long sample size with those two. Debo's really tough because, his first game back, 4 targets, then another 4 targets. I just wish I saw more involvement, but he's one of those players that his projections don't really matter. If he gets 3 carries, if he gets 4 targets, he's so efficient. Like a Debo Samuel rushing attempt is the most valuable rush attempt in football. So that's all we really care about. On the Seattle side, do you have a preference of the 3 wide receivers?
I think it's Metcalf for me. Kind of already mentioned, like last week we saw Lockett play more of a limited role. Just over half the snaps, only about 70% of the routes, which is well below what he normally does. And then it was like JSN and Jake Bobo kind of like rotating together. So I guess those 2 guys are fine punt options, especially JSA. But for me, Metcalf's the guy that I think is going to get lost in the shuffle this week. You think about the quarterback concerns, you think about the tough matchup against San Francisco, you think about everyone wanted to play CMC and, Lamb and Amon-Ra, and it's tough to fit DK Metcalf. So he's interesting to me as a one-off in this spot. Like I said, I don't think I'll be stacking Geno or Drew Lock, but if you want to play Metcalf as a one-off, I think that's totally viable in tournaments.
Yeah, I like JSN when you factor in the price. He was second on the team in routes this past week. So this isn't the JSN we had at the beginning of the week. Last thought on this game I have is because CMC is so popular, is Charbonnet one of those players like, why would you play a running back in the same game who's probably going to carry some roster percentage too? Like it just doesn't make any sense with those two.
Say that again. Sorry, I was reading something reading something in my notes.
Just basically like Charbonnet is going to be fairly popular too. Like he looks like a play that Devin Singletary was the last couple of years. Like he'll get some volume, maybe he'll get in the end zone, but like his floor is what, like 7 points or something. So it feels like a play that like feels kind of thin because him and Dillon, if they don't get in the end zone, they're worthless.
Potentially, yeah. And I think this, and this obviously assumes Ken Walker is out, but if that's the case, last week we saw him play just a ton of snaps. He played almost every snap, didn't he, in that game when Walker left? So this week, now that they have time to game plan,
85%.
Pete Carroll is going to get like DJ Dallas involved on passing downs and stuff like that, right? So I don't think he's an incredible play in a tough matchup, but he's a pretty good play, especially for cash games. So like that's kind of how I'm looking at him, very similar to Dillon. You just hope he doesn't fall in the end zone, and you hope he scores 8 points, and that's not enough for a tournament, right? If you fade him.
Yeah. My Vegas take is if this goes to 7.5, I would take Seattle, but right now I would take the 49ers.
I will take over 24.8 team implied total for San Francisco.
Nice. Let's go with our slate breaker. This week we have a great sponsor. It is the Vortex Football, which
baby.
I had a Vortex as a kid. It was the John Elway version.
Oh, who
and
didn't?
Then
have
later on, I got a Russell Wilson version a couple years ago, and now my kids, no, definitely not last year. My kids have a version of the Vortex Football. I don't know if there's a sponsor on it, but man, what a great feeling when you can just throw that thing, let it whistle. So thank you, Vortex, for sponsoring this slate breaker. Mine is George Kittle because he's on a heater right now since week 3. What if I told you, Betz? He's the tight end 1 in total points.
I believe
He's pretty awesome. And he has a history of being heavily targeted versus Seattle. Last couple games, 4 for 93 and 2, 4 for 40 on 11 targets, 9 for 181 and 2 on 12 targets. He is the dude.
Are these his games against Seattle?
Yeah, these are games against Seattle right here.
Oh, baby. Wow.
First look article. You should read it. It's on our site, dfspass.com. But also...
Do I have to pay for that?
You do, definitely. But I want to say this about Kittle. Because he's 6K, it's a decision point on this slate. And so I'm declaring this more as, if you don't pay up for him, he's going to make you pay. But also, I think I want to be overweight Kittle compared to the field. If they're going to punt with Logan Thomas or Musgrave or Turd Ferguson, Kittle is worth the price. And we've seen him correlate pretty well with Purdy. He's interesting because on that chart you showed me, he has the most negative correlation for CMC. So if I was going to fade CMC, this would be a place where I'd add Kittle and maybe pay elsewhere at running back.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think that's super interesting from the game theory standpoint. I'm going to go mega chalk. I think CeeDee Lamb goes bonkers on the slate. And then that's okay, right?
Button?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. In tournaments, it's okay to eat some chalk sometimes, which that's a good reminder for people. And I think CeeDee Lamb's, for wide receiver, it's never good chalk, but I feel like for CD, it's pretty good chalk. Over the last month, he's averaging almost 14 targets per game. He's averaging 10 catches per game, 33% target share, 36% first read target share. So, like, he's Dak's dude, and he also leads the team in end zone targets in that sample. So, like, that's just an unreal combination in a matchup that you could see CD just go absolutely bonkers. So, I'm going to be, whatever the roster percentage is, I'm going to try to be overweight the field in my exposure to CeeDee Lamb this week.
Yeah, last year, Justin Jefferson was the most expensive wide receiver on the Thanksgiving slate. He also had the most DraftKings points at 32.3. So it's one of those things that you can say all day, here's a cute play. What if he just has the most raw points on the slate? Period. CeeDee Lamb.
Right.
So he is freaking awesome. All right, one more segment.
DFS Battle Royale.
Betz and I used to do this all the time over the years, and we thought we would bring this out for the Thanksgiving slate. Betz and I are going to compare a DraftKings lineup that we haven't showed to each other, and the winner buys the other one a night of Chili's, because that's just the most fitting thing that we could do for each other. So next time Betz and I see each other in person, because I feel like it would be a really disservice, like, hey, dude, I got you Chili's to go. It's coming to your house.
Hey, man, I just Venmoed you $20. Enjoy your Chili's.
Yeah, I know. That wouldn't be as good. So we'll go one by one. We might have some overlap, but Betz and I are competing on Thanksgiving. So my quarterback is Dak Prescott.
I've got Dak.
Yeah, I kind of knew we would go there. At running back, I have Christian McCaffrey and David Montgomery.
Oh, interesting. Okay, I paid down, and I'm assuming Ken Walker's out, so maybe you and I can decide if I get some reprieve. But I'm playing Zach Charbonnet, and I'm playing AJ Dillon for the cheap value.
Okay. So right now, I mean, my team is crushing yours, just destroying your squad.
Who was your RB2? Oh, David Montgomery.
David Montgomery and CMC.
Okay, that's fine. I feel great.
All right. At wide receiver, I have CeeDee Lamb because I'm not a dumb man.
Yep, I stacked him with Dak.
Jaden Reed, who I think is a great tag at 4.2. And I went for a wild card here, Jamison Williams at 3.4.
Okay, this is probably where it's going to be decided a little bit. I also have Jaden Reed, but I have Curtis Samuel as a cheap punt option, 3,600. Look, dude, Curtis Samuel, obviously he left early last week, but in his previous 3 games, he had 8, 4, and 6 targets. Give me 8 points, Curtis Samuel. That's what I need to beat Borg here. So Curtis Samuel, Jaden Reed, and CeeDee Lamb.
All right, my tight end, I have the Turd Ferguson to stack with Dak.
Of course, I have him with Dak.
Okay.
We have the same stack.
At flex, I have JSN at 4,100. I'm assuming, so you can spend up here. Is this where you have CMC?
Yeah, I thought I was going to let you think you got away with it, and you had CMC to just bury me. But I also have Christian McCaffrey in my flex, waiting for the late night hammer.
Yeah, I guess that makes sense. And then at defense, I have the Dallas Cowboys.
Okay, I'm terrified. I have the Lions, actually, at 3,200.
Lions are a good play. Okay, so we actually have a much different lineup in a lot of places than I thought.
So the keys are going to be Jamison Williams versus Curtis Samuel, the defenses, the Lions versus the Cowboys, and Dave Montgomery versus... look at me, just eating the chalk like a square, Kyle, with Dillon and Charbonnet. So those are the keys.
Yeah, mine Montgomery and JSN. So anyway, If you want to play with us, you can go to ballersdfs.com, our DraftKings League, Fantasy Footballers DFS, Borg, and Betz. We'll have lots of contests coming up, Thanksgiving ones, and then we will be back later on this week talking the main slate. So if you're wondering, hey, you guys didn't go through everything that you normally go through, well, we want to devote it just to Thanksgiving. And then on Friday's podcast and on the DFS Pass, we will have all of our articles that looks at week 12 for the main slate. We will get you ready. Hope you have a great Thanksgiving. Tell everybody bye, Betz.
Yes, happy Thanksgiving to everyone out there. Enjoy the holiday, enjoy the football, enjoy the food. It should be great. So don't forget to late swap. Don't forget that Jordan Love's going to break the slate. And we'll be back on Friday to preview the Sunday main slate.
Thank you for listening to another edition of the Fantasy Footballers DFS and Betting Podcast. Don't forget to visit us on the web at thefantasyfootballers.com.